Welcome back to Malden's Revolution. I'm Mark Linehan. 250 years ago today, on April 19, 1775, more than 700 British soldiers marched down what is today Massachusetts Avenue on their way to the town of Concord to seize cannon and other arms being stockpiled there by the Massachusetts Provincial Congress. At about 5 a.m., they arrived in the town of Lexington, just shy of Concord, where they encountered 77 militia on the Lexington Green under the command of Captain John Parker. Someone fired a shot, we'll never know who, and the American Revolution began. But the events of April 19th actually began the night before, on April 18th, 1775, when a Boston coppersmith, silversmith, and goldsmith named Paul Revere snuck across the river in a rowboat, landing in Charlestown, and then rowed down this road right here onto the mainland, where after intercepting a British patrol in what is today Somerville, darted off and escaped into the town of Medford and continued on the famous midnight ride of Paul Revere. And thanks to writers like Paul Revere, some known, some unknown, towns and their militias all over Massachusetts were activated and responded to the Lexington alarms. One thing I want to point out, that church behind me is sitting on what remains of the famous Bunker Hill. So that is Bunker Hill right behind me, and Paul Revere rode down this road into what is today Somerville, and when he ran into that British patrol, he was diverted up into Medford, where riders were dispatched to all the towns of the north so that they could respond to the Lexington alarm. And one of those towns that was contacted by one of those riders was the town of Malden. Right behind me, you see the Concord Casino. That is in what is today Everett. So that was Malden right there. Now this bridge you see right here, the Alfred Street Bridge, did not exist. The Alfred Street Bridge was built in 1787 on the original location of the penny ferry. That was how the people of Malden got back and forth to Charlestown, was a ferry, and the route was the exact same route on which the Alfred Street Bridge was built. So like militias all over Massachusetts, the men of Malden responded to the Lexington alarm, and today, on the 250th anniversary of the battles of Lexington and Concord, you and I are going to honor and remember their service by walking the same route they did. We are going to follow in the same steps of the Malden militia, and we're going to begin at the home of their captain here, at the home of Captain Benjamin Blaney, who was the captain of the Malden militia on April 19, 1775. Now his home, which was standing as recently as the late 19th century, unfortunately no longer exists, but it was standing near the corner of Chelsea and Ferry Street and what is today Partridge Terrace. Now this part of Everett right here, we're right north of Route 16, but from where Captain Benjamin Blaney's house was, you get some nice views of Boston. So if you look down that way, you can see the Hancock Tower, you can see the Prudential Center, and you can see all of downtown Boston right down there. That was the view from Captain Benjamin Blaney's house, and this is where he would have set off when he first heard the alarm on April 19, 1775. And he would have headed up this way, down towards Malden. Something I should mention as we're walking down Chelsea Street towards Malden, Captain Benjamin Blaney's house was in what is today Everett, but his property extended down towards the water across some land of what is probably today Chelsea. He owned a tannery and he had a wharf on a small inlet that led out to the Mystic River. Now the land that Benjamin Blaney owned back then, part of it I believe is today the New England Produce Center, which is the primary food distribution site for all of New England. So if you buy a fruit or vegetable anywhere in Connecticut, Vermont, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine, Rhode Island, that piece of produce went through land formerly owned by Benjamin Blaney. By the way, for my fellow gravestone nerds, Benjamin Blaney's property was originally the property of the famous Malden stonecutter, Joseph Lamson. That's where he lived. That's where he had a wharf and a tannery and a home in the 17th century. So we have worked our way up into Malden from Everett, and we are now at what is now Bell Rock Park. Now Bell Rock Park, right over here behind me, Bell Rock Park was originally where the alarm bell would have been, but the alarm bell at the time of the American Revolution was actually located in the meeting house. So when the alarm bell was rung after that rider came in from Medford, they would have heard the bell in the meeting house, which was built right on the edge of Bell Rock Park, near the parsonage, which is actually still standing. This is the old parsonage here in Malden. It's obviously been renovated. It's not, it's not exactly how it appeared 300 years ago, but this was the home of the Reverend Emerson, who is the famous William Emerson of Concord, which is what we're talking about today. It was his father was the old minister in Malden, and so that parsonage was built for him originally, I believe. And the meeting house would have been located right on the side of Bell Rock Park, right over here. And this would have been a natural meeting space. So many of Benjamin Blaney's neighbors in Everett would have met him here. They probably would have met him on the road or just gone to his house originally. But then many more people probably would have gathered here and at the meeting house. So one of the nice things about walking along these old roads is that if you look on a map in like 1775, Malden didn't have that many roads. So it's kind of easy to know whether or not someone took Main Street or Salem Street or the Chelsea Road or the Medford Road. The problem is modern day streets don't always line up perfectly, even if they have the same name. Sometimes they do though. It's actually shocking how often an old road actually does kind of line up perfectly with where it used to be. So we've headed up Main Street. A scooter. We've headed up Main Street from Bell Rock Park, from Benjamin Blaney's house at the corner of Chelsea and Ferry. The next destination of the militia would have been the Kettles Tavern. Now, what's interesting about the Kettles Tavern is that this tavern, this main tavern in Malden, actually went by several different names, and on some maps, it incorrectly has each of those taverns as a different location, but in fact it changed its name because the original owner, Hills, it was Hill's Tavern, and when Hill died, his son wasn't of age yet, and the mom married Kettle, and so at the time of the American Revolution, the tavern was under the administration of Hill's stepfather. So right on April 19, 1775, it was Kettle's Tavern. Hi, Malden. And Kettle's Tavern was right near the intersection of the Salem Road and the Medford Road. And right around there is the intersection of where the library is today. So right here, that's our beautiful library back there. Well, that's the church. The library is right next door. You actually see both buildings. There's the church, there's the library. And right around the corner at Malden Square was Kettle's Tavern. Now, when Kettle's Tavern was torn down, that was where the first City Hall in Malden was built. And the first City Hall, there's an old photograph of the first City Hall right next to this bank. So where this building right here, this office building, City Center right here, that was the original location, and this street right here. City Hall was actually right here up against it. This was the location of Kettle's Tavern. So all the militia of Malden, whether or not you were coming from Everett down this way, or if you were coming from Melrose up Main Street that way, everyone would have gathered at Kettle's Tavern. Also, even non-militia would have gathered at Kettle's Tavern because taverns back then were your main source of information. So taverns was the natural gathering place for anyone who wanted to know what was going on. And the training field was on the other side of the tavern where the militia would have trained. So everyone's gathering at Kettle's Tavern, and apparently they spent several hours there at Kettle's Tavern awaiting orders of where to go. So from Kettle's Tavern, they would have headed down the Medford Road, which is now Pleasant Street. So we're heading right through downtown Malden. This is downtown Malden right here. Da, 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 da. This is downtown Malden. Now, again, Malden only had 3 or 4 roads in 1775. So it makes sense that these roads are actually now where all the commercial activity and where the center of town is. So if you walk down the Chelsea Road, you end up in downtown Everett. You head up Main Street. Not only do you end up going through downtown Malden, you end up going through downtown Melrose as well. Okay, so we just came down Pleasant Street right here, and we're now about to head into Medford. But one of the interesting things I want to point out here is that the road actually splits. And up here is what is now called Elm Street, and this is Route 60 right down here. Now, another thing I want to point out is that this church right here, First Parish in Malden, this church is not the physical building, but this congregation is the descendant of that original church in Malden that was established in, I want to say, 1646. But so this congregation is almost 375 years old, if not exactly 375 years old. But the question is whether or not the militia went down this road or this road right in front of me. So going up to Medford, which of these two roads did they take? Now, this road right over here, this actually comes right back. It actually joins at the far traffic light way down there. It's just a little U-turn kind of out of the way. But on a map in the 19th century, I saw that this road was called the Old Road. So I sometimes wonder if actually the road went up and around like this, because behind First Parish is the Beebe Elementary School, and behind it is a massive rock outcropping. So I wonder if the road actually couldn't go this way back in the 18th century, if it had to go up this way. And that would almost make more sense, because this road right up here, this was the home of Captain John Dexter, who was one of the most important leaders in Malden. This is where George Washington actually had lunch when he came to take command of the Continental Army. And he visited his friend Captain Dexter. His mansion was right over here, across the street from what is today the synagogue. Okay, we're heading down Pleasant Street, and according to the sign, we are officially leaving Malden. We have crossed into Medford, my friends. Next up, Medford Square and the home of the captain of the Medford Militia. All right, we are heading towards Medford Square, and I hope I don't need to tell any of you that 93 did not exist in 1775. If it did, the militia never would have gotten there. And here we are. Welcome to downtown Medford, everybody. All right, friends, welcome to the heart of downtown Medford. We were at the Malden clock today, so now let's say hello to the Medford clock right over there. Now, this is a really important intersection in the history of the American Revolution, because this was not just where the Malden militia came in order to head on over towards Lexington and Concord, but it's also where Paul Revere came. So right behind me, right over here, this, around here, was the Craddock Bridge. This was the bridge, this was the first bridge where you could cross the Mystic River from the direction of Boston. So this was the soonest part that anyone living east of here could cross the Mystic River, and it was right here at the Craddock Bridge. And this is where Paul Revere crossed. Originally, he was gonna go, he crossed the river into Charlestown. He lands in Charlestown, he goes down the Charlestown Neck, and he is gonna follow the highway straight to Menominee. But in Charlestown, on the other side of the neck, he runs into a patrol of British soldiers. This is around, just past where Sullivan Square in Somerville is today. He runs into a patrol of British soldiers, and he is forced to take a detour. So he was not planning to come to Medford, but it's really critical that he did. So he comes up this way to Medford, and he stops into the home of Captain Isaac Hall. Captain Isaac Hall is the captain of the Medford Militia. His house is still standing. It's that white building right there. It's now a mosque, but that building right there, that is the home of Captain Isaac Hall, and it is from here that Captain Isaac Hall and other citizens of Medford send out riders in different directions to warn those towns that the British are on their way to Concord. So one rider that we know, his name is Martin Herrick, he heads north and he warns Stoneham, and I think he also warns Reading. Martin Herrick goes up to Stoneham and Reading, he goes up this way, and then an unknown rider is the one who heads back the way we just came, and he's the one who warns Malden, Chelsea, and potentially Lynn. So this was the intersection of where it all happened. You have Paul Revere coming up this road, and by the way, when he gets to Medford is at midnight, at the early morning of April 1975. So the midnight ride of Paul Revere, at midnight, he was in Medford, right here, heading to the home of Captain Isaac Hall to rouse the Medford Militia, and according to Paul Revere's own account, it was from here, after he stops at Isaac Hall's house, it was from here that he then was warning every house after this all the way to Lexington. Now, when the Malden militia gets here several hours later, they're actually held up here. Now, the local histories, they kind of disagree sometimes as to where everyone was first ordered to go, but from what I can find, Colonel Gardner, who was our commanding officer, sorry about that, I think I just nailed my own microphone. Colonel Gardner, who was our colonel, our commanding officer of the 1st Middlesex Regiment, he had ordered us to Watertown, but by the time the militia got to here, to the Craddock Bridge, we were actually held up and told, hey, wait a minute, we want to make sure we know where the British are before we continue on our way. And we're held here for several hours, and it's not until noon that we are finally given the order instead to head towards Arlington down what is High Street. So for the next little bit, we're actually going to be following the exact same path as Paul Revere. So as we follow the route that Paul Revere would have taken, I wanted to give you a better glimpse of Captain Isaac Hall's home. As you can see, it's incredibly well preserved. You can see on the plaque right there, it was built in 1703. And like I said, it is now a mosque, which also has another location in Malden. Now, what's really interesting about that is that Medford and Malden historically were spiritually linked. Even though Medford is as old as the city of Boston, it was settled in 1630, it didn't get its own meeting house until 1691. So a lot of Medford people actually worshipped in Malden. Then when they got their own meeting house, some of them still chose to worship in Malden, which is why a lot of Medford people are actually buried in Bell Rock Cemetery in Malden. But then we started playing them in football on Thanksgiving, and then the spiritual connection was completely dissolved. And now it has been reestablished because of the two locations of the mosque. Okay, I'm now walking uphill, and I'm on High Street in Medford. Beautiful neighborhood. It gets the Marm Simons Historic District, according to a sign I just passed. But I'm now starting to figure out why the militia spent a few hours in a tavern and then a few hours in another tavern in Medford. Like, there were breaks. There were breaks. So if you're at all interested in what the Malden militia and Paul Revere saw that day, believe it or not, there's a great intersection here, the intersection of High Street and Woburn Street, where you actually have not one but two historic homes that both were standing on April 19th, 1775. So if you look behind me right here, this is the Ensign John Bradshaw house, which says was established in 1685, I think is what the plaque says. And then this yellow house across the street right here, that was built in 1739. So both these homes right here that we're about to pass between, these two homes that we're walking between, these are the same houses that the militia and Paul Revere walked between 250 years ago today. I know, it's a little on the nose, but just be grateful it's not a tavern. But also, don't come at me in the comments with, are you one of those Bostonians who orders iced coffee in the winter? Because yes, I am. Okay, so we are making some nice progress after our dunks break. We are officially in Menotomy. I know, it says welcome to Arlington, but at the time of the American Revolution, Arlington was called Menotomy. It was originally a village that was part of Cambridge, but then when it got incorporated as its own town, it dropped Menotomy, and it got incorporated as West Cambridge, and then after the Civil War, it changed its name to Arlington after our national cemetery. So if you're wondering, is Arlington National Cemetery named after Arlington, Massachusetts? Nope, the reverse. All right, friends, here we are in beautiful downtown Arlington. Here we have the famous Regent Theater right behind me. And this is the intersection of Medford Street and Mass Ave, which at the time would have been called either the Lexington or the Concord Road. So right up this way, if you go that way, you head straight to Concord, and back down this road right over here, that's what takes you straight to Cambridge. And this is where the Malden militia intercepted the British Army. Now, it actually wasn't a huge component of the British Army, to be completely honest with you. It was actually a rear guard of wagons and supplies. Now, what's really interesting about this is that there are actually a lot of different accounts as to what actually happened right here, at least when it comes to Malden's involvement. Oop, I touched the mic again. There's actually a lot of different accounts as to what happened here when it comes to Malden's involvement. If you want more information about the Battle of Menotomy, I highly encourage you to seek out the Arlington Historical Society. They're the ones who are going to be the experts on this. So I highly encourage you to talk to them. But when it comes to Malden's involvement, there's actually not a lot about what Malden did, except it seems that we may have latched ourselves onto the Chelsea militia. And even there are a couple different accounts of what happened. So we do know that there were some wagons and some supplies that were captured here, and a couple British soldiers killed. But it seems that the Malden militia may have deferred to the Chelsea militia at this engagement. But there are two different people who get credit for their involvement in this matter. One is the pastor of Chelsea, the Reverend Payson Phillips gets some credit for leading this action. But there's also a man named Daniel Lampson, who's listed as a half Indian, and he is also given credit as the one who actually led the charge here. And from here, the Malden militia Ubered home, then follow and harass the British Army back down Mass Ave towards Cambridge. But before they get to Cambridge, Lord Percy, who's in command of the retreat, decides instead to take a left back towards Charlestown instead of trying to cross the bridge at Cambridge, and he crosses the Charlestown Neck, and the Malden militia chased the retreating British all the way back to Sullivan Square, where we began our adventure today. Now, thankfully, all the men of Malden made it home that night. There were no fatalities or casualties among the militia of Malden. However, many patriots did give their lives that day. The towns with the highest casualties included Lexington and Danvers. What began in the early morning hours of April 19, 1775, as 77 Lexington militia watching a column of British troops approach their town, only 24 hours later has exploded into a siege of the third largest city in North America, the town of Boston. By the morning of April 20th, 1775, the town of Boston is surrounded by 15,000 militia, not just from Lexington and Concord, but militias from towns like Acton and Danvers, Salem, Sudbury, Dorchester, Roxbury, Chelsea, Medford, and of course, the town of Malden. The province of Massachusetts Bay is officially at war with the Kingdom of Great Britain. But will this remain a conflict of Massachusetts grievances, or will this grow into a war for American independence? Only time will tell. But 250 years ago today, all we know is that the town of Boston is surrounded, the British Army is trapped, the Royal Navy controls the seas, and nobody knows what will happen next. Stay tuned. Because I'm old, because I'm 39 years old and I'm dying.